All right, everybody, we need to talk about Indonesia right now because August 15th, 2026 turned into one of the most seismically violent single days that country has experienced in years. And I mean that literally. Not one major earthquake. Two. On the same day, on opposite ends of the same vast archipelago, one of them a magnitude 6. 9. Detonated deep beneath one of the most densely populated corners of North Sumatra, a region home to nearly 280,000 people sitting right on top of it. And that same morning, thousands of kilometers away, a magnitude 7. 7 ripped through Flores Island, buried villages under landslides, triggered a tsunami warning, and the death toll from that one has kept climbing every single day since. So if you think this is just another earthquake story, stay with me, because what's happening beneath Sumatra right now, and what already happened on Flores, is something worth understanding properly, not just skimming past. I want to walk you through the real numbers, the real science, and where things stand as of the most recent reporting, because the picture has moved a lot since this first broke. Let's start with the earthquake near Pematang Siantar in North Sumatra, because the story behind this one is genuinely fascinating once you understand what the data is actually telling you. Magnitude 6, 9. Location, roughly 15 kilometers north-northwest of Pematang Siantar. Time, 5:54 in the evening local time on August 15th. Depth, right around 170 kilometers beneath the surface. I want you to hold that depth number in your head, because it explains almost everything about why this earthquake behaved the way it did, and why, despite being a magnitude of 6, 9, the outcome ended up being wildly different from what you'd expect from a quake that size. The epicenter sat close to Pematang Siantar, a city of more than 260,000 people, and not far beyond that, roughly 70 kilometers away, sits Medan, a metropolitan area of about 2.4 million residents. Read those numbers again, 70 kilometers from a city of 2.4 million people. A magnitude 6, 9 earthquake, 70 kilometers away. That is not a comfortable distance under normal circumstances. That is close. And yet, what happened next defied what most people would expect from an earthquake that powerful, that close to a major population center. The reason comes down to one number. The depth, somewhere in the neighborhood of 170 to 180 kilometers down. Not 10 kilometers, not 20, not even 50. Well over 100. And 50 kilometers beneath the surface of the Earth. Think about what that actually means physically. The energy released by this earthquake had to travel upward through more than 150 kilometers of solid rock before it ever reached the surface where people are living, working, sleeping. And with every single kilometer of that journey, the energy spreads out, it weakens, it dissipates, it gets absorbed by the rock surrounding it. By the time whatever was left of that energy reached the surface, a magnitude 6, 9 earthquake. Something that, under different circumstances, could have been devastating, had effectively been transformed into something far less destructive than its raw magnitude would suggest. There were no immediate reports of casualties, no reports of significant structural damage. The quake's sheer depth did the work of protecting everyone above it. But here's what's genuinely stunning about this event, and I don't want you to walk away thinking depth means nobody noticed anything, because that's not what happened either. Even after traveling through all that rock, even after all of that natural energy dissipation, this earthquake was still felt by an enormous number of people. Estimates put it at somewhere around 11.5 million people experiencing moderate shaking, with several million more feeling light shaking, and tens of thousands feeling weak shaking on the outer edges of the felt zone. Let that sink in. 11.5 million people felt moderate shaking from a single earthquake. That's more than the entire population of a lot of countries on this planet. That is what a magnitude 6. 9 is still capable of doing to human beings, even when it's happening 170 plus kilometers underground. The United States Geological Survey issued a green alert for this event, meaning a low likelihood of casualties and economic losses, and Indonesia's own meteorology, climatology, and geophysics agency, known as BMKG, formally stated that no tsunami warning was in place for Sumatra as a result of this quake. No tsunami. No confirmed casualties. No major structural collapses from a magnitude 6. 9. That outcome is close to miraculous when you consider the raw energy involved, and the single factor that saved this event from becoming a catastrophe was that buffer of rock between the rupture point and the surface. That depth is the whole story here. Now I want to zoom out, because understanding where this earthquake fits into the bigger geological picture of Sumatra is genuinely important, and once you understand it, you won't look at this part of Indonesia the same way again. Sumatra sits directly on top of one of the most powerful and dangerous tectonic collision zones anywhere on the surface of this planet. The Indo-Australian plate is sliding, grinding, and diving underneath the Sunda plate at somewhere around 55 millimeters a year. And that number sounds tiny on its own, almost meaningless. But multiply that by millions of years, multiply it by the sheer scale of these plates, thousands of kilometers across, hundreds of kilometers thick. moving with a force that no human engineering can meaningfully compare to. And what you get is the Sunda megathrust, one of the most energetic fault systems in the entire history of recorded seismology. This is the same system responsible for the 2004 earthquake, the magnitude 9, one that killed more than 220,000 people and generated a tsunami so massive it crossed entire ocean basins and claimed lives on coastlines as far away as Africa. That earthquake happened on this same system, these same plates, the same geological engine that was active again on August 15th beneath Pematangsiantar. What we saw this time, the magnitude 6, 9, is what scientists classify as an intermediate or deep focus earthquake. When the Indo-Australian plate dives beneath Sumatra, it doesn't just quietly vanish into the mantle. It keeps moving, it keeps descending. And as it does, the enormous pressures and temperatures at those depths cause the rock itself to fracture and release energy in earthquakes that originate far below the surface, deep inside the descending slab itself, rather than at the shallow contact zone where the two plates actually meet. That's a fundamentally different animal from a shallow earthquake, a shallow quake, like the magnitude 7. 7, that struck Flores that same morning at a depth of just 10 kilometers, releases its energy right at the surface level, right where the buildings are, right where the people are. A deep focus earthquake like the one near Pematangsiantar releases its energy far underground, and physics does the work of spreading and weakening that energy before it ever reaches anything capable of being destroyed. But here's the part that matters most, and I don't want anyone walking away with a false sense of security. The fact that this particular earthquake was deep and caused no casualties does not mean Sumatra is safe. It does not mean Pematangsiantar is safe. It does not mean Medan is safe. Because this exact same subduction system, these same plates, can and do produce shallow earthquakes too, massive ones. And when they do, the results are catastrophic. Historically, Indonesia averages somewhere around 1.5 magnitude 7 or greater earthquakes every single year, and around a dozen magnitude 6 or greater earthquakes annually. On August 15th, that statistical average was shattered because Indonesia didn't get one major earthquake that day. It got two on the same day on opposite ends of the archipelago. Because while that magnitude 6, 9 was unfolding beneath Pematangsiantar in the west, something far more devastating had already struck thousands of kilometers to the east, on the island of Flores, earlier that same morning. A powerful magnitude, 7 earthquake hit off the coast of Flores in East Nusa Tenggara province at 5:58 in the morning local time, with the epicenter around 68 kilometers northwest of the city of Enda. USGS put the depth at just 10 kilometers. Do you see the contrast? The Sumatra earthquake at over 150 kilometers deep produced 0 confirmed deaths. The Flores earthquake at 10 kilometers deep started killing people almost immediately, and that number did not stop climbing for days. That's what depth means in practical human terms. That's the difference between a deep earthquake and a shallow earthquake. And in this case, it was the difference between a headline and a genuine tragedy. In the immediate hours after the Flores quake, officials were reporting numbers that climbed almost by the hour. Early figures out of the region put the toll at 38 confirmed dead, according to Indonesia's National Disaster Management Agency, with a local rescue official putting the count slightly higher, around 40, and roughly 50 people reported injured at that stage. Then, as more reports came in from Reuters and other outlets, the figure moved up to 47 dead, described by officials as certain to rise further because rescue teams simply could not reach the worst affected areas yet. And they were right to warn that it would rise, because it did. By the following day, rescue teams working through the rubble and the landslide debris recovered additional bodies, and the death toll climbed to 51, with thousands of people displaced from their homes across the affected regencies. And then it climbed again. The most recent figures put the death toll at 53, with more than 1,300 homes damaged, over 2/3 of those severely, along with damage to healthcare facilities, schools, and government offices across the region. Scores of people were reported injured, and thousands remained displaced as search and rescue operations continued. The reason that toll kept rising has everything to do with geography and infrastructure. Landslides triggered by the earthquake buried or completely cut off a number of remote villages spread across 6 regencies on Flores Island. Officials describe some villages as completely buried, with the roads that would normally let rescuers reach them destroyed by the very same earthquake that buried the villages in the first place. Helicopters were deployed. A rescue vessel was sent to support logistics because roads into the hardest hit areas, especially Nagakeo Regency, closest to the epicenter, were blocked, and communication signals in the area were disrupted. Rescue teams reportedly attempted to reach some of these areas by ferry when the roads simply weren't an option. Think about what that actually means on the ground. There were villages on Flores that were completely buried under landslide debris, and the infrastructure that would let help arrive had been destroyed by the same event that created the emergency in the first place. Every hour that passed while helicopters were still flying in and rescue vessels were still moving mattered enormously for anyone who might still have been alive underneath that debris. The initial quake was followed by an enormous number of aftershocks, more than 230 of them recorded throughout the day, the strongest measuring magnitude 6. 2. Think about that for a second. A magnitude 6. 2 would itself be considered a major earthquake in most parts of the world. In the context of what happened on Flores that day, it was just an aftershock, one of hundreds. That alone tells you the scale of energy that the magnitude 7 main shock released. Indonesia's Meteorology, Climatology, and Geophysics Agency issued a tsunami warning immediately after the quake and urged residents to stay away from beaches and riverbanks and move to higher ground. Some waves under a meter in height were recorded in a handful of areas, and the warning was lifted roughly 3 hours later. 3 hours of people across multiple provinces, not knowing for certain whether a larger wave might still be coming. And this is happening in a country that carries the single most devastating tsunami memory in modern human history. December 26th, 2004. Magnitude 9. 1. More than 220,000 people killed. The largest loss of life from a tsunami ever recorded in modern times. That memory lives in the mind of every Indonesian who was alive that day, and when a tsunami warning goes out anywhere in that country, that memory is exactly what fills people's minds as they run for higher ground. Residents of the areas closest to the epicenter fled their homes for temporary shelters. One resident of Talabura village in East Nusa Tenggara, a 51-year-old woman named Nona, described it simply. The quake was massive. The shock was so strong. She said there were 13 people inside her house at the time, and all 13 ran to save themselves. 13 people in one house, all of them running for their lives with no warning, no preparation, in the middle of an ordinary morning that turned violent in seconds. That is the human reality sitting behind every one of these USGS numbers, behind every magnitude reading and depth measurement and alert level you see on a map. Real people in real houses running. Video and photos coming out of the region showed buildings collapsing into dust and rubble in towns like Momare and across East Manggarai, with people screaming and running into the streets as structures came down around them. A port terminal in the region reportedly collapsed. A waiting room reduced to rubble. Buildings that had stood for years, in some cases decades, came down in a matter of seconds. That is what a magnitude 7 at 10 kilometers depth looks like on the ground. That's what shallow means in practice. That is the difference. A single number, the depth reading, translates into when you're talking about human suffering rather than just data on a chart. Let's go back to the Sumatra side of this story now and zoom out even further, because this is where the science gets genuinely important for understanding the long-term picture, not just what happened on one specific day. Pematang Siantar sits in North Sumatra province, a dense urban area of close to 280,000 people spread across nearly 80 square kilometers, sitting within the broader metropolitan orbit of Medan, one of the largest cities in all of Indonesia with roughly 2.4 million residents. All of these people, all of these millions of human beings, are living on an island positioned directly above one of the most active subduction zones on the planet. The Indo-Australian plate is diving beneath them at that steady 55 millimeters a year. The Great Sumatran Fault, a massive transform fault, runs the entire length of the island, and it has been responsible for some of the most destructive earthquakes in Indonesian history. Not deep events like the one on August 15th, but shallow surface-level ruptures capable of flattening entire cities. The Deep 6. 9 that struck that day was, in a sense, a reminder from the Earth itself. A signal that the system is still active, still moving, always moving. This time, the energy came from more than 150 kilometers down, and the region got lucky as a result. But the same system, the same plates, the same geological forces that produced this earthquake also produced the 2004 magnitude 9. One disaster, and the 2005 Nias earthquake, a magnitude 8. 6 event that struck the same general region. These are not abstract historical footnotes. These are events that happened on the exact same geological engine that was active again this past weekend. There's an underlying vulnerability here that's worth being honest about. Officials noted that the population in this region largely resides in structures that are vulnerable to earthquake shaking, even though earthquake-resistant structures do exist in the area. That vulnerability is the piece that makes Sumatra so dangerous long-term. Not just the geology itself, but the fact that millions of people are living and working in buildings that were never designed to withstand the kind of shallow, high-energy rupture that this subduction zone is fully capable of producing. Modern earthquake engineering can make an enormous difference here. Reinforced concrete designed to flex rather than shatter. Base isolation systems that let a building move with the ground instead of fighting against it and breaking. Early warning systems that can give residents seconds, sometimes minutes, of advance notice before shaking arrives. All of that technology exists, and it works, But it costs money, it requires expertise, and it requires sustained government commitment, public awareness, and consistent enforcement. In rapidly growing cities across Sumatra, that full combination isn't always present yet. The deep earthquake beneath Pematang Siantar was, in a real sense, a gift. An opportunity. A major seismic event delivered with a built-in safety mechanism in the form of extreme depth. And the result was that 11.5 million people felt it. And as far as the reporting shows, nobody died. That is fortunate. That is geology being kind on this particular day. But geology is not always kind, and the same plates capable of producing a deep, relatively harmless earthquake today are just as capable of producing a shallow, devastating one at some point down the road. There's something else worth sitting with here, and it's the sheer coincidence, geologically speaking, of these two events landing on the same calendar day. The magnitude, 7. 7 on Flores, and the magnitude 6. 9 near Pematang Siantar happened on entirely separate fault systems in different parts of the vast Indonesian archipelago, roughly 2,800 to 2,900 kilometers apart. These two earthquakes did not cause one another. There's no direct mechanical link between them. But the fact that they happened on the same day is a powerful reminder of something that's easy to forget in the quiet stretches between major seismic events. Indonesia is always moving. Indonesia is always shaking. Based on multiple decades of data, the country experiences somewhere around 13,000 earthquakes a year, which works out to more than 35 earthquakes every single day, year-round. Most of them are too small to feel. Plenty are moderate events, producing localized shaking that barely makes local news. And then, occasionally and unpredictably, one of them turns into a 7. 7, or worse, a 9. 1. The Indonesian archipelago sits at the intersection of multiple tectonic plate boundaries. It's where the Indo-Australian plate meets the Eurasian plate, where the Pacific plate exerts pressure from the east, where the Sunda plate at the center of this collision zone is being squeezed and loaded with stress from multiple directions simultaneously. No other country on Earth experiences quite this combination of earthquake frequency, earthquake magnitude, and population density all at once. That's not exaggeration for effect. That's the geological reality this nation lives with every single day of the year. So what does all of this mean for the people of Pematang Siantar right now, for the residents of Medan, for the tens of millions of people across Sumatra who live, work, and raise families? On this beautiful but perpetually shaking island, authorities have advised residents to stay alert for possible aftershocks, to inspect their homes before going to sleep or leaving the house, checking for any newly formed cracks in load-bearing walls, structural pillars, or concrete foundations. They've advised people to avoid standing near balconies, brick fences, or aging concrete awnings that could be weakened by aftershocks, and to secure heavy furniture like bookshelves and wardrobes that could tip over if the ground moves again. That's practical, sensible earthquake preparation advice, and it applies not just to the immediate aftershock sequence from this particular 6, 9, but to the ongoing, permanent seismic reality of living in Sumatra day in and day out. But the bigger message here, the one that this entire double earthquake event is really underscoring for anyone paying close attention, is that Indonesia's seismic risk isn't some distant theoretical concern for future generations to worry about someday. It's active. It's present. It's happening right now in real time, and on this particular weekend it struck twice within hours of each other. The Flores earthquake is already a confirmed disaster, with the death toll having climbed from an initial 38 to 47 to 51, and now past 53 as rescue crews continue working through debris and reaching villages that were previously cut off. The Sumatra earthquake stands as a warning, a literal deep one, about what could eventually happen if the next major rupture along that same fault system occurs closer to the surface. The Great Sumatran Fault runs directly through this region. Shallow earthquakes along that fault have happened before in Indonesia's history, and they will happen again at some point. The real question isn't whether those earthquakes will eventually occur. It's whether the cities sitting above that fault will be ready when they do. For Flores, right now, the immediate priority remains rescue and recovery. Getting helicopters and vessels into the areas that are still cut off, reaching the communities blocked by landslides, finding anyone who might still be alive beneath the rubble, and continuing to clear and assess the more than 1,300 damaged homes along with the schools, health facilities, and government buildings that were hit. Officials have been direct in saying they expect that death toll to keep climbing as search teams push deeper into the hardest hit regencies. And given the scale of the landslides that buried entire villages and blocked nearly every road in multiple areas, further increases in that number are, unfortunately, close to inevitable. For Pematang Siantar and the wider North Sumatra region, the earthquake that struck on August 15th was about as close to the best possible version of a magnitude 6, or 9 as you could realistically hope for. The depth protected essentially everyone in its path. That protection, though, was a product of where this particular rupture happened to occur within the subducting slab, not a permanent guarantee about what comes next. The next major earthquake along the Sumatran fault system might not originate 150 or more kilometers down. It might come from 10 kilometers. It might come from 15. And when that day comes, the 11.5 million people who felt this one will be dealing with something enormously more dangerous than what they experienced this time around. That's not fear-mongering. That's simply an honest reading of the geology and the physics involved on a subduction zone that has already produced a magnitude 9. One earthquake within the lifetime of people who are still alive today. 2 major earthquakes, one single day, one island nation that happens to be among the most seismically active places on the entire planet. Flores is still counting its losses and still searching through rubble and landslide debris for anyone who might remain unaccounted for. Sumatra, for now, got lucky, protected by more than 150 kilometers of rock standing between the rupture and the surface. And the earth beneath both of them hasn't stopped moving. It never really does. I also want to touch on something that often gets lost in the immediate rush of breaking news coverage, and that's the disruption these kinds of events cause well beyond the immediate disaster zone. Multiple flights into East Nusa Tenggara province were cancelled in the hours after the Flores quake, cutting off one of the faster routes for aid and personnel trying to reach the island. Consular offices in the region issued notices reminding foreign nationals, including tourists traveling through the area, to stay cautious and follow official guidance as aftershocks continued. Flores itself is a lush, mountainous island in the Sunda chain, sitting not far from Bali, one of Indonesia's most visited tourist destinations, which means the ripple effects of an event like this extend into tourism, transportation, and regional logistics well beyond the immediate humanitarian response. 50,000 aid packages were reported en route to the island in the days following the quake, an indication of just how large-scale the relief operation has become as the true scope of the damage became clear. It's also worth putting this into a slightly longer historical frame because Flores has seen destructive earthquakes before, just not usually at this scale. Back in December of 2021, a magnitude 7. 3 quakes struck offshore, north of Mamere, at a depth of about 16 kilometers, another shallow event on the same general stretch of seafloor. That one killed 1 person and injured over 170 others, and it triggered hundreds of aftershocks of its own in the weeks that followed. Compare that to what happened this time, a magnitude 7. 7 at 10 kilometers depth, more than 230 aftershocks in a single day, and a death toll now sitting past 50. And you start to get a sense of just how much worse this particular event was than what this region experienced only a few years earlier. That's the pattern with shallow earthquakes along this part of the Sunda chain. They don't happen constantly, but when the right combination of shallow depth, strong magnitude, and vulnerable infrastructure lines up, the consequences escalate fast, and this past weekend showed exactly how fast that escalation can happen. I think it's important to hold both parts of this story at once, rather than letting one overshadow the other. The Sumatra earthquake is a genuinely remarkable case study in how depth can neutralize what would otherwise be a dangerous amount of seismic energy. And it's a legitimately useful thing to understand if you want to make sense of why 2 earthquakes of relatively similar magnitude can produce such wildly different outcomes. But it should never be treated as reassurance that the region is somehow safe going forward, because the same fault system is fully capable of producing a shallow rupture the next time around, with none of the protection that depth provided this time. And the Flores earthquake is the sober reminder of exactly what that shallow scenario looks like when it plays out in the real world, with collapsed buildings, blocked roads, buried villages, and a death toll that took days to fully reveal itself as rescue teams worked their way into the hardest hit and most remote corners of the island. Stay safe, everyone watching from Indonesia. Stay safe if you've got family anywhere in Sumatra, in Flores, in East Nusa Tenggara, more broadly. Rescue teams are still working through the debris on Flores. As I put this together, scientists are continuing to monitor aftershock activity in both regions, and international attention remains on the recovery effort as aid packages continue arriving on the island. I'll keep bringing you every update as this situation continues to develop, whether that's a revised death toll out of Flores, new details on the recovery effort, or any additional seismic activity along either of these fault systems in the days ahead. If you have family or friends anywhere in the affected areas, check in with them, make sure they're safe. And if you felt either of these earthquakes yourself or you're currently dealing with the aftermath on the ground, I want to hear from you. So drop that in the comments and let me know exactly what you experienced. I'll be watching closely, and I'll be back the moment there's something new to share.